we talk about here we go. Talk about comprehensive plans, what that means, what they are, and more importantly, how to get involved. And then we will end this training hearing from some of our local staff working on comp plans on the East Side and in Seattle. And then we'll have Q&A at the end. But I'd love to introduce myself and some of the other staff on this call. But hello, my name is Marcella. I use she, her pronouns. I'm calling in from Seattle and I'm the state organizer. So for most of the year, I spend my time working on our statewide legislative campaigns on issues like missing middle housing and protecting farmland. But in the off season, like right now, I help out with some of our more local work. But I'd love to pass it off to some of our other staff. Kate, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kate Brunette. I know some of you already. I am FutureWise's Director of External Affairs. So I manage our fundraising, communications, and support our grassroots organizing. The main thing I'm working on right now, despite in addition to supporting this training, is planning our annual event coming up in just a few months. And I hope we'll see you in person on the farm at 21 acres. And I'll pass it to Tiernan.
Thanks, Kate. Hey, everyone. I'm Tiernan Martin, he, him pronouns. I'm FutureWise's Director of Research. So I developed the research agenda that provides us with the knowledge we need to take action at the state level, legal level, and with our local policy work. Right now, I'm mostly focused on Seattle, which is the community that I live in. I am the staff lead on reviewing and leading advocacy on the Seattle Comprehensive Plan update. And I'm stoked to be here to share a little bit about that with all of you later on in the program. Passing it to Brady.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Brady Nordstrom. I go by he, him. I do a lot of my work in the east side of King County, so with a focus in Bellevue, Redmond, and Kirkland. And really a lot of that work is focused on housing and housing affordability. So yeah, I look forward to chatting with you all a little bit later in the session.
Sweet. So great having our team here. But let's get started. I've got a couple housekeeping things to mention real quick. Just want to let folks know that for this call, you should stay muted. We'll have time at the end for Q&A if you want to ask your question out loud. But also feel free to post questions in the chat or share comments. We'll try to answer them as we go. I won't be watching the chat, but other staff will. So we can help out. And then the other thing I just want to share real quick for folks that might be leaving the call early. I know some of y'all let me know that you're not able to stay the whole time. If you do have to leave early, you should fill out this form before you go. This just helps us to get you connected with other resources and make sure that we know you are here. Let's get started. So I want to hear from y'all. How familiar are you with comprehensive plans? Throw a number on the scale of 1 to 5 in the chat. 1 is like, I have no idea what a comp plan is. 5 is like, you could be a city planner. You're an expert. You know everything. Okay, I see 5 right away. That's a 7. Okay, I'll take it. Great. I see some 2s, some 3s. Okay, so mixed bag. It seems like folks are relatively familiar. But hopefully all of y'all will learn something on this call today. But before we talk about comprehensive plans, I want to do a mini history lesson to understand why we even have comp plans. So in the mid-1900s, Washington was experiencing unprecedented growth that was largely unchecked, meaning we were rapidly growing, building tons of houses that were sprawling into farms and our forests and parks. And it just was not a Washington that was going to work for us. But in 1990, we passed the Growth Management Act, probably heard of the GMA. This requires cities and counties to plan for growth. And the vision is that we are building a Washington that works for everyone, one where we're able to balance protecting farmland, forests, and parks, and still have dense, livable communities that folks are really excited to live in. Fun fact, the folks that passed the GMA went on to found FutureWise, in case you couldn't tell. If you go to the next slide, that takes us to our comprehensive plans. These are 20-year plans for growth in our cities and our counties. These are massive, massive documents that set the policies and the guidelines for elected officials and government staff to make decisions on a day-to-day basis of what our city is going to look like. It is important to note that after we have comp plans, we still need to implement the policies, but these plans can pave the way for what we want our cities to look like. And you can see on this slide, and from the title, comprehensive, these plans are comprehensive. It covers everything from what our city is going to look like with housing to transportation, climate, utilities, everything in between. And these plans need to be updated every 10 years. So when we have these updates, this is a really, really big deal. The decisions that are made in these updates will be affecting you and your community. So if there's decisions made around housing, that could be affecting your rent in 5 to 10 years, or affecting the trees that are in your neighborhood, or how easy it is for you to be able to bike to work. So, like I said, these plans have to be updated every 10 years. Or you can go to the next slide, Kate. This is just an example of like the breakdown of how we get from a comp plan to like how it actually affects you. But next slide again. I want to talk about the timeline for these comprehensive plans. Like I said, they have to be updated every 10 years. They can be updated, like smaller amendments can be updated each year. But these larger updates, what we call like periodic updates, are happening right now. So you can see from this map, there's 4 different, what we call cohorts of counties and the cities in those counties and the deadlines to finish their periodic updates. So you can see from here, the counties that are orange, so Snohomish, King, Pierce, and Kitsap, these counties, their comp plan should be adopted by the end of this year. Emphasis on should. I think we'll hear from Tiernan on specifically Seattle that might not be able to hit that deadline. But these are the deadlines that ideally they're able to hit. And you'll see that each year there's a new cohort of counties and the cities within those counties that need to have their comp plan updated. Okay, next slide. Great. The process to update these plans, wonky is an understatement, but these plans are so large that it takes a really long time to make sure that they are successfully updated, make sure that the public is engaged, and it spans a few years. The process to update a comp plan is not identical for each city or each county. And it really greatly depends on where you live and what the process looks like. But there's a few overarching benchmarks that do remain the same for each plan, no matter where you live. So if you did put like a 5 in the chat for comp plans, you might think this is a gross simplification of the process. That's because it is, but I want to give y'all the headline information of how comp plans are updated. So if you look at the screen, there's a few main parts. First thing that happens with the update is what we call scoping for environmental impacts. So cities will decide to study different outcomes of comp plans. So what this means is if you have a couple different options of what you want your comp plan to look like, the environmental impacts of those options need to be studied. If they are not studied, they cannot be put into the comp plan draft. So this is the very first thing that happens. And you may be familiar with the phrase like EIS. Next thing that happens is the planning commissioners draft the comprehensive plan. So this is their first take, the plan. There's tons of revisions and public engagement. And then the last thing is that council adopts the plan. Once it's adopted, then we move into implementation, making sure that these policies actually get turned into reality. So you'll note at the top too, public engagement is a part of every single one of these benchmarks. Cities and counties are legally required to engage with the public. What that looks like, though, again, could be totally different for different cities. But for example, one thing that it could look like is maybe an open house with planners and city staff, like what's happening right now in Seattle. Or maybe there's a public forum before council adopts a plan. Maybe there's a public comment period where you can submit written testimony. There's tons of options of what this could look like for folks. Okay, next slide, Kate. So this is just an example. I got this from the Linwood Comprehensive Plan Update website. This is like an overarching view of what their plan is for updating their plan. On their website, if you like look through it more, they'll have like specifics of public engagement, but you can typically find a timeline like this for any city or any county. Okay, next slide. So I want to talk about how to actually get involved in your local comp plan. But before we do that, I want to take a second and focus on why we should even get involved. Why did you even come to this meeting in the first place? Hopefully your takeaway so far is comp plans are big and important, and we can do a lot of really cool stuff like adding protected bike lanes or adding in more housing or making sure we have enough affordable housing. A lot of cool things can happen. But we also have a lot of opposition on these issues. There is a very loud minority of folks that are invested in the way that our cities and counties look and don't want them to change. And oftentimes, these are the folks that have a lot of the time and resources to get involved. So these are the folks that city and county planners are hearing from the most. Like, I get it. Change is super scary. It's not always fun. But we do have to accept that the world is going to change. By 2050, we're expecting 1.8 million people to move to Washington. Just like let that sink in for a minute. 1.8 million people by 2050. And on top of that, we are already dealing with housing shortages, climate change, racial injustices. So the question isn't, are we going to grow? The question is, how are we going to grow? Are we going to grow in a way that opposition wants, which means more tents on streets and worsened crises? Or are we going to do it in a way that makes sense for everyone, where everyone has enough housing, everyone can get to work safely, get to school safely, and tackles all these problems that we're already facing? Also, love that you're in that picture. That's fantastic. But I did include this picture. I want to talk about it for a second. So this is a photo from an open house in Seattle, either last week or 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, great. So this is a planner talking with some local residents about the comp plan, hearing from folks. Right now, oftentimes planners are hearing a lot from folks like your neighbor that care a lot about their property value, and not always from, let's say, like students that are couch surfing or your grandma that needs to live near the bus line to be able to get to her doctor's appointments. But we can shape these conversations. But it means that we need to be like Angela and show up to these meetings, and maybe not showing up in person all the time, but we need to be showing up in inboxes or on Zoom calls or public forums. We need to be the people that the city is hearing from. So I do want to congratulate you. You're already on a great step. You carved out an hour, you're here, you're hanging out with us. This is awesome. But this is just the beginning of the organizing that we need to be doing to winning across the state. But it's also exciting because we're the people that's going to be shaping our future. So hopefully you're excited. I'm pretty jazzed about this, if you can't tell. But I'll get off my high horse and let's dive into the nitty gritty of how can you actually get involved in your comp plan. So Kate, if you want to go to the next slide, I am going to post a link in the chat if my computer will work. Here we go. So I want to walk through, I can't remember if it's 5 or 6. 6 steps to getting involved in your local comp plan. I've also made a guide that I posted in the chat that walks through each of these steps in a little more detail. So feel free to click that link in the chat, bookmark that. I'll also be emailing it out so you can take a look at it. Send this to your friends, send it to everyone you know. But let's walk through the steps of getting involved. First step, you should just find out more about your local comp plan, update, timeline, any upcoming events. Truly the best way to do this, you should just Google the name of your city or county and comp plan updates. Probably the first result will just be the website for the comp plan update. If you are having trouble finding something like that, you can always just search around on social media, search around on planning department's website, or you can call them, email them to get more information. But it's good to get a sense of where you are on the timeline, what's the major deadlines coming up, what's happening. Second step, you should learn more about the plan if it's available. Again, it depends on where you're at in the timeline. This could mean if you are like, you love the wonkiness, if you want to just read parts of the plan, I won't stop you. Go for it. But if that is not your thing, and I will certainly not be reading draft comprehensive plans in much detail, I recommend getting a sense for either draft EIS plans or the comp plan by checking out trusted organizations' reactions. I screenshotted part of a reaction from Complete Communities Coalition that Tiernan will be talking more about. They're a really great resource if you're in Seattle. And you can also just email staff liaisons too. If you like really care about bike lanes, just say like, hey, where are we at with bike lanes? Like, give me the summary, what's happening. So first step, learn more. Second step, learn more about the plan. Next slide. Third step, assess your own priorities. There's probably a lot of things you care about in your community. You should focus on the top 1 to 3 things that you care about the most and make sure that you're advocating for those things. I'd also recommend being specific when you're thinking about what do you care about specifically. Like, for example, I put a couple examples up here, but if you really care about public transit, think about what aspect are you going to take on that. Do you care about having more housing near transit so it's easier to live without a car? Or are you focused on other accessibility issues? Be specific, but also, again, you do not have to be an expert to have an opinion. You do not need to know the city planning wonky terms on transit-oriented development and floor area ratio. No, you don't need to know that. All you need to know is that you care about having more housing near public transit. Okay, next slide. Once you know what you are advocating for, you want to craft your personal story. This is potentially the most important step out of all those steps. Personal stories are what help us win on issues, because we are not going to be able to win just by spouting out facts or really just, being like, this is so important because the FAR is crucial. Like, it's not going to work. The way we are going to get people on our side is by moving hearts and minds. And the way to do that is to share motivating, compelling stories again and again and again. So having a compelling personal story is something that you could share at a testimony, something you can share in a conversation at an open house. It's a letter to the editor. Shortened version is maybe a tweet or post on X. I don't know if we call them tweets anymore. But this is your opportunity to be really personal. Share what you care about and why, how you're affected, how your community is affected. How would you be affected if it was resolved? What's the bright side of the issue? So in the guide that I posted in the chat, when you get to the crafting personal story, we have a whole separate toolkit just about writing your personal story. So I really recommend taking some time to just write out why you care, refine it, practice it, get really comfortable with it so you can just talk about it with folks. This is something you can always reach out to me about too if you want feedback, if you want any help, if you're not sure which issues to prioritize. This is literally my job. I would love to connect with you. I'll put my email in the chat too in a minute. Okay, so that's step 4, crafting your personal story. Here's a sample story. I don't think we quite have time for that. The sample is also in the guide, so feel free to take a look at that. Go to the next slide, Kate. Last 2 steps for y'all. Step 5, go forth and share your beautifully crafted story. This depends on where you're at in the timeline, but if available, if there's a public testimony or public forum coming up, there's an open house, council meetings, you should go to those meetings, put them on your calendar, practice your story, get ready to share it. If there isn't anything like that coming up, still don't wait. Again, especially earlier in the process that you can get involved, the more influence you'll be able to have. So if there's no events coming up, draft a letter to the editor, to your local newspaper, or go back to the update website and find the city council members or staff liaisons that are doing this work and set up a meeting with them to talk with them in person, or even just email them your story or post on social media. There's tons of ways to make your voice heard without these structured public forums. And when you have your story, it's super easy to do. All right. Oh, there's one more step. Go back one more, Kate. Great, thank you. So last step, once you've done all that, get your friends involved. The more people we have showing up at these events, emailing, testifying, the more powerful we are. And especially if you are like a very wonky person, you love to get into the nitty gritty, having your friends that maybe aren't that familiar with these issues, but still really care about how much they're paying in rent, or they care about being able to bike safely to work. Those are the folks that the city planners want to be hearing from. And it's really easy to get involved and make your voice heard. And sometimes all you need to do is just ask your friends to get involved. So that's the last step. Again, the link that I posted in the chat, the comp plan guide, take a look at that. If you have any questions about how to get involved in your local area, you can always send me an email, reach out to me at any time. We don't have enough capacity to be involved in every single comp plan, but we'll support you as best as we can. I am going to post I'll post both links in the chat, but I've got a different link in the chat. I'm calling it our volunteer form. This isn't like, you're not committing to volunteering, but go ahead, click this link, fill this out. This will make sure we know that you are here, we know where you're located, and if you need any resources from us, or if we know of any groups that are doing awesome work, we'll get you connected with them. So please, please, please fill that out. Just do that right now while I'm talking. Give it a little click. And I will post the comp plan guide one more time for folks, so you have both of those fresh. But that's my overview of comprehensive plans. But I am going to pass it over now to Tiernan to talk more about the Seattle comp plan, where we're at, and how you can get involved in that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marcella, for the great tee up. And I will just repeat her request. Go ahead and fill out that form. You know, what we can do for the folks who live in Seattle and want to get involved in the Seattle comp plan update is we can ask Marcella to just chop that list down, send us anybody who's interested in getting involved in Seattle, and we will plug you in to our work. So prioritize that link. I'm not going to share the other sign up forms that we have. We're just going to try to make it as simple as possible. So Marcella asked me to come and talk a little bit about what's going on in Seattle. I'll just say from the beginning, I started tracking Seattle's comp plan back in 2013 when we were doing the last one. And I have been like looking forward to advocating for a better comp plan and getting involved in it ever since then. So I am deep in the comp plan world and the weeds. I'm going to try to pull myself out of that and just kind of talk like a normal person would. But I love the questions that we've seen in the chat, and those are exactly the types of things I'm going to try to hit on. If at any point you feel like this is too detailed, put that in the chat and we'll come back and try to answer your questions. Next slide, please, Kate. Okay, so as Marcella said, we are in kind of the first round of the periodic updates to comprehensive plans. So those 4 counties that are highlighted on the screen, Snohomish, King, Pierce, and Kitsap, are all updating their comp plans by the end of 2024. And Seattle, being in King County, is on that same deadline. There is some question about whether the city will meet it or not, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Next slide, please. So how did we get to this point? Well, in 2022, Seattle started its environmental impact statement process. That's what Marcella was talking about, where the city studies the environmental impacts of changing a bunch of policies, which is what a comp plan is. It's a roadmap for growth, and it sets the direction of all the programs and policies and budgets that the city creates. And so they want to study those environmental impacts. And in 2022, they began that process. They asked for feedback from groups like FutureWise, sort of local community groups and members of the public. And we showed up and we told them, we really need you to plan for a lot of growth. Seattle needs to be a leader. We need to grow into a healthy, equitable, vibrant place to live so that we don't have to keep sprawling out into the rural and agricultural lands. In 2023, nothing happened. We waited and waited, and we were expecting a draft plan and a draft environmental report to be released. But the city sure was taking their time. And so 2023 came and went without much updates, but they were behind the scenes working on both of those documents. It was only in March of 2024 that they finally released the draft plan and the draft environmental impact statement. And so things are just kicking into gear after a long hiatus. Essentially where we are at right now is the city has released not only those documents, but several other kind of technical reports and appendices that support the content in the documents, and they've asked for feedback. And so it is a 2-month-long window of time where anybody is welcome to provide that feedback in the form of a comment or a question. And the city has set up some pretty easy ways to do that on their website. So we at FutureWise are very interested in providing that feedback and encouraging you and folks like you to get involved. And so we are building a coalition that is tracking this comprehensive plan, sort of a purpose-built group of organizations that are working together to provide comment and provide direction to the city. And we would love to tie you into that work as well. Later in the year, there will be another round of community engagement. So even if for some reason you aren't able to get involved this time around, once the city has heard from everybody, they are going to take that feedback, create a final plan, and then release zoning maps. Those are specific sort of maps that tell property owners what they can build where. And once they do that, they will also be engaging the community on that. So there's a couple bites at the apple available to you. Next slide, please. Right, so what's in this plan? The city is planning for 100,000 homes to be built between now and 2044. We think that that growth target is probably not enough, but that's what the city says that they need to plan for. Largely, the plan would keep in place the strategy that they have for growing, which is that they concentrate a lot of the new homes and the new jobs in a couple of neighborhoods that they call urban villages. And the rest of the city grows some, but not nearly as much. Again, FutureWise thinks that that approach is ripe for reimagining, and we would like to see the city go farther. As many of you know, the state passed a middle housing bill last year that the city is required to comply with, and the city is complying with it. However, they have chosen to use one of the options in the bill to reserve some of the neighborhoods that only allow single family and duplexes as they are today. And we think that that's something that the city can do better with. Next slide, please, Kate. So this is what the city's strategy looks like right now, all boiled down into a map. Next slide, Kate. This is what the proposed growth strategy looks like. If you squint at these two maps, they actually are pretty similar. There are some little blue polka dots that the city has added, and those are places where more growth would go, more apartment buildings with commercial on the ground floor, and we support that. But if you go to the next slide, Kate, you'll see another version of what the growth could look like. This is something that the city studied in its environmental review. It's the fifth alternative of 5 alternatives that they looked at. And this would allow for a plan for 120,000 new homes by 2044. And it has a lot more of those little polka dots. It also expands where apartment buildings could be built to most places within 10-minute walk of buses. We think that that direction, which is quite a difference from the way that we concentrate growth and housing today, is a better direction for the city to go. And so a lot of our advocacy is on sort of bringing those elements back into the plan. I'm running out of time, so let's keep moving, Kate. This is me at one of those community open houses back in 2022. That is the director of planning. And I think we were talking about the cheese and meat spread. We were just yakking it up. And that is what you can expect at these open houses. They are informal. They are just you and planners talking face to face. You might hear some opinions from folks that you don't agree with, but it is not a public hearing where you have to prepare a speech and where you have to be very on message and where all eyes are on you. It is way more accessible than that. That said, what we would encourage you to do is to join with us and meet for an hour beforehand and just loosen up a little bit. Chat with us, talk about what things you're interested in advocating for, and then we'll all go to the open house together. We just did our first one of those last night and it went really well. So if you sign up for the forum, we will put you in touch with our group so that you can come hang out with us for a little bit before the next ones. Next slide. These are the upcoming open houses. We have 4 in-person open houses left and then 1 virtual one. Then there will also be 2 public hearings. Those are the more formal 2-minute timed events at City Hall that you may be familiar with. We also want you to go to those, but we would strongly encourage linking up with us to help craft your talking points, prepare you for what it's like to go and speak in front of council. And so we will be happy to help you if you want help with that. Next slide. This is the plug for that coalition I was mentioning. We are a very broad spectrum group that all agrees that Seattle needs to grow a lot in the coming years if we want to address the housing crisis, if we want to do better at our climate goals, and if we want to create wonderful neighborhoods to live in where you can just walk to most of the things that you need. We have to be ambitious. And what we're seeing in the draft plan right now is not meeting our expectations from the city. So we would love to work with you if you agree on that, and we would love to talk with you if you don't. We are definitely a group that welcomes lots of opinions, and we want to hear from folks. Next and final slide for me is a link to where you could sign up on our mailing list. Don't do that, just sign up with Marcella's link. But you can also check out our website where we have a bunch of resources that we've created to help bring people into this issue. And you can always email me too, tiernan@futurewise.org if you have questions specific to Seattle. I'm a little bit over. Apologies, Marcella. I'll pass the mic over to Brady now.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tiernan. And again, my name is Brady Nordstrom. I do work in East King County. You'll hear me use the term East Side. I know that there's people from all over the state here, so not to confuse that with Spokane or other areas east of the Cascades. Next slide, please. I, like Tiernan, got involved in comprehensive planning as a while ago, and I've been waiting for these upcoming moments for quite a while. I come at it from a housing perspective, that housing affordability is something that's super important to me. I think it's a necessary component of any space that we're in any urban or rural area. In terms of FutureWise's activity on the East Side, we are engaged in a broad housing coalition called the East Side Housing Roundtable. And this is more, there's multiple ways to organize, and this is organizations. So we're helping organize organizations from major employers, nonprofits. There's a whole bunch of groups involved. And the idea is that when we combine our voices together, that we can get elected leaders and other decision makers to listen. We are also engaged in our own comp plan, advocacy and policy work and commenting on things. And so I guess I'll also mention that while we're involved East Side wide, the main focus is on Bellevue, Kirkland, and Redmond, which are some of the biggest job centers in East King County. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of each of these cities. I noticed that there's a lot of people from all over, so I think it's important to note that I just hope that this will be a few case studies as to what cities are doing, what it looks like. This, as I understand it, this deck will be shared after this event. So there are some slides with a lot of information that I prepared as a resource. So this is both a case study and a map as to what's happening in these three cities. So next slide. So I think it's first important to note where the East Side is in terms of its wider development. So that first issue there, it's from the East Side Heritage Center, it's from 1958. This is where downtown Bellevue is now. And if you look at that more recent photo on the right, that's from a 2022 article in a local Bellevue paper. So this area is changing rapidly. And in fact, many areas in the East Side were farmland not 30, 40 plus years ago, within many people on this call within our lifespans. So now the East Side, there's transit is going in. There have been massive job announcements. And so this is sort of another phase of rapid growth on the East Side that's really critical for the whole Puget Sound. And that's part of the reason that FutureWise has been so involved in advocacy. Next slide. So this is sort of what's been happening in Bellevue specifically. So there's a lot of words here, but this whole process initiated in 2022. And so it moved on to this, Marcel was talking about all these studies that are done through the EIS. So the EIS scoping, which looks at what is actually going to be studied in the EIS, that was done from September 29th to October 31st, 2022. And then this was developed over that next time period until sort of like the spring of 2023, when the draft environmental impact statement came out, where and this was one of the main areas for input. And I should add, along this whole time period, there are public events, there's questionnaires, there's surveys, there's all sorts of things that the city is trying to do to get input from people. As Marcelo also said, these cities are required to do this by law. And these things are delivered to the Planning Commission and to city council members as they're thinking about how cities should grow like Bellevue. So then that moved on to the preferred alternative, which is, the next slide will show a little bit more of that, but that was very recently. It was the FAIS was finally released in February of 2024, and we're currently in this period of the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission is looking at different elements of the comp plan, and they're creating recommendations that will then be passed along to City Council, who they're going to make decisions in fall of 2024 that are then going to impact the next 10 to 20 years of growth. Next slide. So this is just to this is one of those slides that I think I need a little bit more time with, but this is just to show all the different alternatives and the way that the city could grow. You'll see that there's mixed-use centers, neighborhood centers, transit proximate areas. Wilburton is a major neighborhood there. It's one of the main growth hubs in Bellevue. And then low-density residential. Those are areas that have been single-family and will be converted to middle housing because of House Bill 1110. So as you see, there's this huge range of growth that can happen. And there's this is a conversation that we could have for a long time, but I just wanted you all to see just how different these alternatives can be. Next slide. So we're actually getting into the what's happening now and what will be happening in the near future. As you see, on April 3rd, to start at the top there, there's been a bunch of meetings at the Planning Commission. These are all opportunities for you to share your voice and your story. And it's usually focused on a topic area or an element of the comp plan. Next week, for example, on April 3rd, there's a huge opportunity for around housing that the planning commissioners are going to be looking at and forming recommendations around that. And you'll see there, it's in May that the final comprehensive plan is actually moved forward, and then public hearings in June. And then finally, there's going to be a recommendation for the comprehensive plan in July. And so this is all moving very quickly. When it starts moving, it kind of moves pretty fast. So next slide. So this is just in Bellevue specifically, what areas, and this is just to help you all think about the sorts of things that you can comment on in a comprehensive plan. There's the amount and location of growth. And there's all these mentions of draft environmental impact statements, supplemental environmental impact statements. Anything that's studied in any of those documents is fair game for the final plan. So for example, in Bellevue, FutureWise is working with partners to push for more housing capacity and the right capacity for affordable housing, like mid-rise and things like that. Affordable housing options is another one. This is a big conversation in Bellevue and the East Side more broadly. There's incentives, or there's mandatory requirements for affordability. This is something that's happening real time, and it's going to be decided in these coming months. And then also middle housing implementation. That's a huge one on the East Side. Many of these cities were suburbs of Seattle, and they're transforming now into their own urban centers, which is a really fascinating point of time. And then there's all these other comp plan areas: transportation, mobility, air quality, tree canopy, et cetera. So just flagging all of those. And then next slide. This is just immediate things that are coming up in Bellevue. So as I mentioned, there's this planning commission meeting on April 3rd. This is how you get involved. You can it doesn't have to be a long email. But you can send an email about what you deal with your housing, what you deal with, the sorts of things that you need to be successful in Bellevue. And I don't think that I should get too into the details here, but if you attend in person, and this is kind of one of those details where every city is a little different, the city limits testimony to 30 minutes. So there's a chance you might not get to speak. Unless it's a hearing. So that's another one of those details. There will also be a final engagement in May after the final comprehensive draft is released. That QR code there brings you to the Bellevue website. And on the Bellevue website, you'll be able, there's some questionnaires that are still open, but you can also learn more about these opportunities. And then finally, council. All of this moves to council in the late summer and fall. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. And there's usually hearings and other things like that where you can share your voice. So this is, and you can go to the next slide. I won't cover as much with Kirkland and Redmond. There's a lot of details in these as well, but the slide deck will have more information about what's happening in these cities. And so you can go to Redmond here. I think the point of Redmond is everything's in the planning commission right now. So they've moved through all the study. They started a little bit earlier than Bellevue. They're moving into these individual elements, and then you can go forward again. And this is just, I think, a really cool little map to show this is the level of change. All those colored areas in this map, that's the growth hubs that Redmond's thinking about. And it's kind of hard to visualize, but this represents a lot of change for the city, which is the home of Microsoft. Again, not going to spend a ton of time on this. This will go out in the slide deck, and you can move forward to the last slide here. So as I was saying, Redmond's been moving a little bit faster than other cities. So there's many of their engagement opportunities are over, but again, Planning Commission and City Council are great areas to express your voice. So that's it for me. Thanks so much.
Sweet. Thank you so much, Brady. And thank you, Tiernan, for sharing more about your projects. Hopefully your takeaway has been that you know what a comp plan is, but you also know that they are incredibly important for you to get involved in, and also tend to be on the wonky side. But we are here to help. So again, I'm going to drop a couple links in the chat for y'all. But again, you should fill out this volunteer form, whether you are in Seattle or unincorporated Franklin County. We are here as a resource to help you navigate this, help make sure that your advocacy is going well. So please fill that out and we will get you connected with resources. But so never hesitate to reach out to me. I just put my email in the chat. It's marcella@futurewise.org. If I can't answer your question, I can direct you to someone who will be able to help out, and we will figure out your problem. Okay, we've got 10 minutes left, so I want to open it up to Q&A since we've got a lot of staff here. I just want to give you a heads up. If we have a lot of questions, I may have to cut you off, or we might not be able to get to your question. In that case, again, just send me an email. But well, if you have a question, just go ahead and raise your hand, either the Zoom hand or like your physical hand.
Question from Linnell.
Yeah, Linnell, go ahead.
Well, as usual, I just want to bang on about something instead of ask a question. Thank you very much for this very informative program. I am working, my level of concern about we need housing and we need transportation is that it is going to do away with the things that are the new element in the comprehensive plan, which is preparation for climate change. And I'm particularly interested in wildlife corridors, conservation corridors, and non-motorized bicycles. So if there's anybody on the call or anyone that you know that has a concern that we're going to end up with tenements with no places to have either a swing set or a moose in our case, I'd be really happy to connect with you. We've got some really black belt mappers doing conservation and wildlife mapping right now for corridors. But anyway, just wanted to toss that in. Thank you again for your work, FutureWise.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Linnell. And yeah, hopefully we'll be able to get you connected with other folks in Spokane that are doing this work. And yeah, I think the balance of a comp plan is building vibrant communities while protecting the environment and tackling climate change. And when it's done right, it's beautiful, but it can be tricky to get there.
Yeah, well said. And I want to chime in real quick to thank you, Linnell, for all the advocacy work you are involved in out in Spokane. Yeah, I don't think we've ever met before, but I worked with my former colleague, Jamie Potasic, on the sprawl loophole bill a while back, and your case was one of our studies. So thank you for all the work that you've been doing out there for all those years.
Great. All right, do we have any other questions? Go ahead, raise your hand, raise your Zoom hand. Letty, I think I saw you unmute. Do you have a question?
No, sorry, I unmuted on accident. Sorry about that. I'm multitasking.
No worries.
Thank you, though. This was great.
Okay, last call. Any questions?
What about maybe someone throw something in the chat, even if it's not a question, something that you're like, I don't fully understand this as well as I'd like to. What topics are you kind of feeling like, I got the beginning, but I feel like I need a little bit more.
Yeah, this is your opportunity. We've got Brady, Tiernan, Kate. We've
All
got
right.
the experts here.
So, all right, so I'll jump in with a question. The juxtaposition of the EIS scoping process and the draft of the comprehensive plan. I've seen Olympia doing all kinds of work on the draft, but the EIS scoping process either happened quietly without anybody noticing, and maybe it doesn't matter, or it hasn't happened yet, and maybe it matters a lot, or something in between.
I think I can answer that question, Jim. So each jurisdiction has to begin by assessing whether their new comprehensive plan is going to have a significant impact on the environment. And in most cases, comp plans do end up having a significant impact, but not always. And so I don't know the specifics in Olympia. It is possible that they made a determination of non-significance, which basically says this policy isn't going to impact our environment. But let's just assume that you're in a city or a county where they did find that there will be a significant impact, and so they march ahead and conduct that environmental review. They begin with scoping, which is what are we going to study? Which impacts do we think it's going to affect? And they ask for feedback. Are we studying the right things? Are we looking back far enough in time? Are we cataloging all the ways to mitigate those impacts? Then they sort of proceed in tandem. They work on a draft plan, and they work on that environmental report, the EIS, at the same time. Sometimes they're the same document, which can be a little bit confusing because I just said that they're two separate things, but they do have that option to just prepare one thing. And so that, again, might be what's going on there, is that you've heard a lot about a draft plan. It actually incorporates the content of the EIS. I don't know for certain because I haven't reviewed Olympia, but that is a possibility. They are required to do this by the State Environmental Protection Act, or Environmental Policy Act, excuse me, SEPA. So it is highly likely that they have done something, and they're also required to ask for feedback on it. If they're doing an environmental impact statement, they have to have comment periods at several milestones throughout the process. So again, without knowing the specifics, I can't say exactly what's going on, but cities generally and counties generally try to combine these things together, because one is like the plan and another is the study, and they want to hear feedback on both. So it might just be that they are emphasizing one in their messaging and the way they're talking about it, but I would expect that both are happening at the same time.
We also have a question from Leonard. Take it away.
Hi, Leonard here. I was wondering, one issue that came up at the comprehensive plan open houses was, first off, that that utilities wouldn't be able to meet the new higher density, and I mean, I was wondering what would be a good response for something like that. That's something I heard frequently.
It's a pretty common objection, and there are definitely there's a need to improve infrastructure to accommodate more homes. We don't think that it's a good conclusion to then say, well, we can't build any new housing until we have updated every single utility in the city, and that we have to wait until that point. What you'll hear sometimes, another jargon word, is the need for concurrency. That is this sort of premise that all the new homes need to be built at the same time as all the infrastructure to support them. And that's infrastructure really broadly defined. So yes, utilities are part of that, but also things like transit, things like the parks and open space that we all need to live full lives in cities. And what we usually respond by saying is that in the comprehensive plan, you should always start with the land use. You should start with the vision for where we're planning for more jobs and more homes. And that is the future land use map. And then once we've decided where are the right places to grow in your jurisdiction, then you start to think about all those other things that need to be added to make everybody's life, healthy, successful, high access to opportunity and amenities, all the things that matter. And so we usually say start with land use first, and then sort of like incorporate all those other things later.
Cool. Okay, we're reaching the end, so I'm gonna wrap it up. But again, do not hesitate if you think of any other questions, or even if you just want some clarity on something, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll get you connected with the right folks. I just dropped it in the chat again, Marcella@futurewise.org. I will send out an email tomorrow that will have this recording and all of the links that I posted in the chat throughout this training. I do just want to end this by saying thank you so much for joining and getting involved in these comp plans. I am so grateful for all of y'all for taking the time to learn more about this. And I'm grateful in advance for all of the advocacy that you're going to be doing in your local area. So I'm excited to get connected. Watch out for my email. Shoot me an email if you have any questions. Huge thank you to Kate, Brady, and Tiernan for being here tonight and helping out. And hope to talk with all of y'all more later. Have a great night.